Welcome back to Neuroconversion Leadership, where we talk about effective leadership and communication, especially in the STEM workplace. And today with us, we have a special guest, Scott Puccinelli. Scott, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We are happy to have you here. Can you do me a favor and everyone a favor and give a little bit of background of where you started your career and what you do now?
Sure. Yeah, I actually started my career in the Air Force. I was a systems engineer on the F-22. So I have a lot of experience working with engineers, both the system side as well as the development side. And when I got out, I got into sales, in advertising sales, actually, which is looking back, it was a great place to start because it was very fundamental in the approach to sales, but it was also directly tied to marketing, which, we would create a lot of the times on our own. So it was a very creative sales process, very competitive sales industry. And it started to get really diluted as social media came in and the internet expanded. And I was looking for a different avenue. And a guy that I had worked for when he brought me over to a out-of-home company was from tech. I always found it funny how he knew a lot about the advertising sector, despite spending his entire career in tech. He goes, look, it doesn't matter what you're selling. 80% of every business is exactly the same. Picking up the other 20% doesn't take that long. And I said, well, I've been looking to switch to tech for a while. And he ended up pulling me over to the first tech company I worked for. I think it was Sum Total for learning management systems. And I've been spending the last, roughly 10 years on the tech side. A lot of different companies, kind of midstream on their way up, that were getting consolidated by private equity and bought out by private equity. So a lot of different people you work with, both from the finance side, the private equity side, but also from the platform side, because a lot of those deals, they combine platforms, they combine capabilities, they combine services for their go-to-market strategy to, build and scale, especially back then when private equity was putting tons and tons of money in. So you start to mix with a lot of different people, not just from your own company, but as they buy and absorb others, then all of the conversations you're talking about start flying around the room from the different engineering teams, from the different marketing teams, from the different sales teams. So now I got into consulting after I was part of a great company that I got laid off from because I was a part of the first 10% reduction in force during, what was that, May of 2020. And I got an offer to consult for Intuit, which I was just like, yeah, that'd be great. And then I thought, why does Intuit need to talk with me? They're like number one on the Fortune 500. But I started to realize that they were really deficient in a certain area that wasn't their core business, which was kind of almost B2C, but it's just B to SMB. And it got me into consulting. So I had more experience going into different businesses that have different product teams, that a lot of them were product created and product driven from a marketing perspective. And they hit a plateau at a certain point because a lot of those were developers and programmers that created the companies. They're not salespeople. So they don't know what to do because it's not their forte. And, marketing and product can only sell so far. And then you have to get a real go-to-market strategy in place. And that's really what I had done up until I got with the most current company I'm with, which is an AI company.
So out of curiosity, when you started in sales, you were selling advertising, essentially. So you were working with a bunch of creative people, and now you are selling technical products. So the people that you're dealing with are very technical engineers and the such. What is the difference?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think your question's kind of going is, what's the difference between the two? I would say there's a lot of similarities, right? Because yes, programmers and developers are technical, but they're also very creative, right? And I think that the creative side really needs to be properly developed into a sales execution, because, on the tech side, I would say it's more of a, let's build it and see what we can do with it. Well, that's great, but let's also do that in reverse, and let's see what people need and then build that for them. So and one isn't right or wrong. I would say there's just sometimes the programmers are right. Let's build this, see what we can do with it. but let's also see what, people want so we can sell it to them. So that if you have a nice hybrid where you know what people want, and then you build something just to see what we can do with it, you might find an ancillary use that you weren't planning for. So, but just going in blind like that, of building it and just see what we can do with it, I wouldn't recommend that. So that happens both on the programming side, and it's similar to in advertising, where they would have these creative ideas that um, don't always necessarily directly tie to how that product or service is sold when the rubber hits the road. Right? It's a very creative marketing plan, but that's not how people are interacting on the front lines with sales and the customers. So you have to find that perfect blend of, we can make something creative from an advertising perspective. Let's just make sure that it meets the way people are going to ingest it, so it creates the demand it's supposed to create.
So was it their lack of understanding of the product or of the consumer or something different that I'm not thinking of?
I would say yes. A lot of the times, the marketing is extremely data driven, as they should be, and a lot of the times that data does not include feedback from sales. Now, to their credit, sales is absolutely horrible, in my opinion, of giving proper feedback to marketing. So that's kind of the age old dichotomy between the two. However, the lack of customer understanding, I would say it exists, not in as much, and they totally miss the mark on what they're creating to market the product. Like, for example, if they're marketing a tennis racket, they're selling a baseball bat. It's not like that. It's more of the language that they use. And the think of a doctor. A doctor will tell you all about this drug and how it's created chemically and its interactions on what it can do in your body, and it works with this and these drugs. Nobody understands that. All you have to say is, if you're feeling like your sinuses are getting stuffed up, this pseudoephedrine will help shrink the whatever's in your nose. See, I don't even know, the capillaries in your nose, whatever it is. And you can breathe easier. That's all people want to know, right? So that's kind of the disconnect, is that marketing can get too technical or too specific on what it actually is versus how it's going to work and what it's going to do for you.
You talked about the difference between kind of sales and marketing. How about the difference between salespeople and engineers and how they tend to communicate?
That's very similar. It's the engineering team, by just by nature, they're incredibly intelligent. They're engineers, and they think about their education and all of their courses that they took up, and then everything they do on a daily basis is like literally the exact opposite of what salespeople do, which is just talking and interacting and kind of gathering conceptual information that they talk amongst each other, versus data driven and tech driven and code driven from a somebody who creates software. When they're talking with each other, that's where, again, I that doctor analogy is pretty much the same. They're talking in coding terms, and they're talking in platform terms, they're talking in technical terms of why they're going to do something, but it doesn't translate to the sales rep that really has no idea what they're talking about. All they want to know from a sales perspective is, what is this going to do to alleviate the pain of the customers, which is X, Y, and Z. Does it do that? How does it do that? How quickly does it do that? Why does it do that? They don't, the technical answers sometimes kind of get in the way of that. So you have to, I did a lot of advertising and marketing campaigns with doctors, and lawyers are very similar, right? They specialize in certain areas of law. So not only are they incredibly intelligent with law overall, but like their specialty sector, they know everything. They know the precedents, the cases. None of that matters to the consumer. So you have to have this filtering system of, you can't say these things when you actively market externally, because nobody knows what you're talking. They don't, your customers, your future customers don't even know to look for these things. So what is that you're solving? how would you say that? And what do you think they think when they have this problem? What are they really trying to fix? It's the exact same thing on the programming side. Why are you building this? What's it going to do? How's it going to solve these problems? Does it solve these problems? Those are the communication breakdown points I think exist tremendously within the tech side.
So, just to be clear, what you've been talking about seems like the way engineers would communicate with customers, or were you talking about how engineers communicate with sales, or
I
is
would
it
say with
both?
sales. I mean, well, sometimes when companies are smaller and it's let's say an engineering uh, created company on the tech side, and they've been just gaining customers kind of by proxy by product driven marketing. They could have created a platform that doesn't necessarily need a lot of customer interaction. Um, I would say that in every case it needs customer interaction because even if it doesn't, one of the things I tell the programmers that create their platforms is you're still missing money, right? You're leaving money on the table. If you're not trying to actively sell them, I promise you, there's more things that you could be doing and discussing to either sell more of your services for a higher price and longer term, or building gaining feedback and building exactly what they're wanting to do the same what I just said, sell more for longer. So when they talk with customers directly, yes, that's certainly a same breakdown because I don't see a difference between customers and salespeople when it comes to engineers and to creative teams from the advertising world. We as salespeople think the exact same way as a customer. We don't know what the technical side. I mean, we don't need to. We don't need to know, how the thing was built. We just need to know what it solves and why that's valuable.
So, what are some pieces of advice you can give to salespeople who need to interact with the engineers of a company?
I think it's fundamental human communication. It's asking questions. I mean, as a salesperson, you should be asking questions by nature anyway. All the answers you could possibly ever want come from questions. So just ask those because if you don't understand why they're doing something, ask. Because then you can find out, okay, I get it. Maybe that's a good strategy. Or you could say, okay, I get it. That's not a good strategy. And here's why. So, and then just have the conversation. It's all about, getting to the heart of it. Why are we doing this? What is it going to do? And then that should hopefully uncover if it is a great strategy, the salesperson should be able to, use their sales filter to take whatever engineering says and translate that to a customer. And then conversely, if it's not a good strategy, it should also be okay. Now I need to translate what the customers are telling me to engineering. So we can either way. There's a conversation to be had, but you can't do that unless you talk to each other first and foremost. So that's one. Yeah, just talk to them. Two is ask the questions.
So, when two people communicate in different ways, like salespeople and engineers, there normally needs to be some adaptation by both sides. What do you think engineers could do or change to be better at communicating with sales and or customers?
I think first and foremost, it goes back to what I just said is, keep them in the loop of what you're doing and why. Because a lot of the times things get developed and sales has no idea why. So, just having that first initial point is here's what we're going to do. That could be extremely beneficial to that salesperson. There might not be any pushback or any conversation needed. That might be something that helps them sell from the moment engineering tells them what they're doing and why. So there might not need no filters needed. It's just that's awesome. We didn't know you were doing that. We are definitely going to use this in our sales approach. It could also be when there's feedback coming from sales. The same thing is just they 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 are more of the mindset of answering the question, and that's it. it's don't just leave the question answered because that it puts it on the other person to you're assuming they know all of the 10 steps ahead that you're thinking. I promise you the sales rep doesn't. So if you just answer the question verbatim, it's like in sales, you would never do that. Like, what's the price? It's $10,000. You just sit there like, no, so there's all different kinds of variables that go into that. So when you answer a question that comes from a salesperson just verbatim, unless it truly just is a very simple question that needs a product answer that they didn't know how to use, that's one thing. If it's a strategic question, you know, answer the question and then go into, again, the reasons why. And I would ask, why are you asking the question? Figure out why the sales reps even coming to them asking a strategic question because you can uncover a bigger conversation. I think it's all of this really comes down to, yes, they're two different mindsets, two different types of people, two different backgrounds, but it's basic communication skills. Just the more you ask, the more you're going to uncover and the better off everyone's going to be.
When it's not about strategy, but it may be about a very technical product itself, do you have advice for how engineers can explain very technical things in a way that the average person can understand?
Yeah, that's a good question because I put that more on the sales rep because typically in that scenario it would be sales trying to understand how to communicate that to a customer or to an existing customer or to a prospect or marketing, how marketing needs to take what they've developed and how they've explained it and then market that. So in a language that a consumer is going to be searching for, looking for, needing the problems to solve. So I would put that on both marketing and sales to just really push and uncover and just constantly ask those questions. Okay, so how explain the value and the problems it solves with this. And then even if the answers come in a very technical demeanor, just keep asking the question, just throw the examples out. Like, okay, does that mean it does this? Which, you can come up with on your own of just rewording in a much more layman's term. And then engineering would say, okay, yeah, that does. And the more you do that and have those types of conversations, the better the engineering team will be at, again, repurposing what they've done from a technical perspective into a more layman's term.
So you essentially have sales and marketing being the translator between engineering and the customer. What about in a smaller company, in a startup where the engineer is founding a company and then needs to go to get funding? They have to kind of be their own sales engineer. Do you have any advice for them when they're in that scenario without having the translator?
They really need to learn first and foremost that unless you're talking to a PE firm or an angel investor or a family member that's going to invest that happens to be an engineer, they're not going to understand a lot of what you do unless you tell them in very strategic, simplistic, fast layman's terms on what it is you're solving and why. Like, here's the problem. They need to reverse engineer it. Here's the problem that existed. Here's the amount of demand that comes from it, that's behind it. And here's the solution for it. And here's how it's done. And how it's done doesn't matter as much. Investors don't care how you build it. They really don't, because they don't know anything about coding or any of that. They need to know you've put the business acumen into building whatever it is you build because you know that the problem exists. You know there's a certain total addressable market for it. You know that demand is there, which you can find a lot with Google and a lot of other and Reddit and things of that nature. And then this is the solution. Just follow Simon Sinek and start with why. Right?
Yep.
Start with why, because nobody cares on how.
It's interesting, though. I've found that most engineers feel the need to explain the how. It's a real struggle to get them.
I've worked with financial companies in the oil and gas sector where engineers are huge. portion of their investor base. And it's like this love hate. They love selling to engineers because they buy so much of it. They invest so much money, but they hate selling to engineers because they ask them so many questions about how the entire investment structure works, how the fund works, how the oil rig works, where the gas gets. It's like, okay, I mean, these are fair questions, but they get so into the weeds with it, quite frankly, because I think they're interested, right? I mean, they want to know something about that industry and how things are built and how they work, because they probably don't. There might be an electrical engineer instead of a petroleum engineer, and they do. They need to. They feel because that's what they do, right? I mean, that's what they built. So I get it, but my best advice would be if you're trying to sell it to a customer to gain revenue, or if you're trying to get funding, the people you're pitching it to don't care. They'll ask you some basic questions. If they care enough, they will find your parallel on their end, and they will, that conversation will be had with that person. Because again, they don't care. They just want that person to come back and say, or that.
Yep.
So
So
they
interesting.
don't care about any of those details.
It's not easy when I'm talking to engineers and they're going to executives at their company. I always tell them, I'm like, the executive doesn't care. They want to know what you need and
Yeah.
have all the other information in your back pocket ready to go, but don't pull it out until they ask for it.
Yeah. My executive MBA was with the Jack Welch School of Management, and Jack was alive when I went through it. And,
Nice.
he was telling the story about how he threw all of the math out of the program, like calculus and this. And he goes, you do not need to know this. There's traditional MBAs that are, right out of college that go for a traditional MBA. A lot of those guys go into private equity. They go into straight finance jobs. And, they're the guys that create the balance sheet. They take all this data and they funnel it down. And this is the balance sheet. You don't need to know how to do that. You're way past that in your career. You're not going to do that. It's a complete waste of your time. You just need to know how to read it. And a balance sheet typically is a page or two. They don't care what the other guy did to put the data in there. They just need to know how to read it and how to execute on it.
As an engineer, I kind of feel the need to know, like, do I trust it? So I've done a lot of financial analysis, and they make software that does it, all the planning. But the first number of times I used it, I had a great big spreadsheet and I was testing it, and it turns out the software was right.
Well, and if it's, again, if you're the executive that's reading it and it doesn't look right, or it's not what you expected, okay, you're not going to be the one that dives into it, but you're going to get maybe the person who brought it to you, or a team of people that didn't create it to look into it. Right? But again, you're not going to be the one that's doing that. You're going to just know, okay, this doesn't look right. Let's make sure that it is right, and let's put these people on it. Again, they're not going to be the ones doing it. So from your point of, how do you communicate to these people? Speak their language. It's the same from sales to programming, and just trying to almost diffuse the technical side of it, and filter it. And it's the same from programming to and engineering to sales. Is tell them as much as you think they can understand, and then repurpose the rest in a way they're going to understand it.
And when you say repurpose, how do you mean?
Just change the more layman's terms. You know, just instead of telling them the different algorithm points that you've changed, you can say that we changed the algorithm to do this, this, and this. Okay, well, they understand what an algorithm is. They know that they changed a lot. Why'd you do it? Well, this is why we did it. You don't need to tell them where or how you
Yep.
dove in and changed the code from that, or what you did with the previous code, or if you're keeping it, or when it's sunset, or all that. You're just going to confuse them. In the worst case scenario, if they try to regurgitate what you're saying as an engineer to a customer, A, the customer will go back to what we said. They don't care. And B, you might say something that piques, almost like steps on a landmine. It
Yeah.
piques a negative in the customer's perspective. They don't need to know that either.
Yeah. Every conversation is better if you start with what does the other person care the most about? And if you can figure that out, yeah, what do they need to know and what do they want?
Don't say boo-hoo. That's a
That's a good
great
one.
sales quote because you just shouldn't. You don't know until you ask the question. You don't know if it's going to be bringing up, uh, you know, you're going to put a brick wall in front of your own sale for when you didn't have to. I mean, you might be, right there and it's going to be finished and you say something that you shouldn't have. There was no reason to say that. So it's the
Uh,
same with engineering. You don't want to bring that into the conversation. If you think it's going to, if it doesn't matter to the salesperson, just don't tell them because it's only going to muddy the waters from a technical perspective if they try to regurgitate that to a customer.
I like it. When in doubt, stop talking.
Right.
That's my motto. All right. This has been great, but we need to start wrapping up. How can people reach out to communicate with you and or learn more about you?
They can reach me on LinkedIn. My name's pretty unique.
Yep.
That or I think my email is actually on my LinkedIn as well. So my email and potentially my phone number, I'm not sure. So LinkedIn's probably the best way. I'm on it quite a bit.
Perfect. I will put a link to your LinkedIn page in the show notes. And then lastly, to wrap up, is there one piece of communication advice everybody can benefit from?
Asking questions. It's
Asking
just
questions.
asking questions. Yeah. I mean, especially in the digital world, hieroglyphics that my children's generation uses in text. It's just like no punctuation, like that's not human communication. So they took out of context to the ultimate level in society. Just ask questions. Ask whatever it is that comes to your mind because it's a sign of emotional intelligence and empathy. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, it's going to start a conversation that either level sets from out of context or bubbles up something of great importance that both sides really didn't realize was a problem.
I love that. I am a big proponent of asking questions. They either solve a problem or take things to a higher level, or sometimes both. So, Scott, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Neuroconversant Leadership. We're over 100 episodes now. And as mentioned, I'm going to be making some changes. So I would love your feedback on what changes I should make, what things I should add, what things I should take away. Please do me a favor and reach out either on LinkedIn or on my email address, which is jdoran@neuroconversantleadership.com. I look forward to hearing your suggestions. Thanks a lot. Until next time, have a great week.